So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Natecla Scotland monthly online forum. It's fantastic to have you all with us this evening. I am over the moon to be exploring a subject tonight with the wonderful Rosie Quin from the City of Glasgow College. She's looking at working with ESOL literacy learners and using some methodology called learner experience approach. But what is interesting is that she's talking about using minimal resources, which is something that a lot of ESOL teachers must feel drawn towards. So just before we get started with Rosie, can I just remind you to keep yourselves muted as it improves everybody's sound quality. I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout, when you're very welcome to post questions there or pop your hand up. I'm sure Rosie will have time to answer questions towards the end as well. So enough about me and Natecla Scotland. Let's head over to our fantastic guest speaker this evening, Rosie Quin. Thank you so much, Rosie.
Oh, thanks, Pauline. It's really lovely to be here. It's strange to be back on Zoom. I can't believe we used to live most of our lives on Zoom, and I think it's been over a year since I've been on Zoom. So apologies if I'm a bit slow with the technical aspect. I can't see anyone at the moment. Pauline, is that normal?
Yes, it is normal. It's
Right.
just because you're in presenting mode.
Okay, right. All right. Okay, so let's get started. So I don't know if any of you have ever felt like this when you've been preparing for your ESOL literacy classes. I think that it's something that's quite common with ESOL lecturers and ELT teachers that, that we don't have enough training before we start teaching ESOL literacy classes. So I had a chat with my colleagues and asked them, what they thought that the reason was. And the survey said that they believed that there was a lack of training and a lack of adult focused resources. So I don't know if that's something that resonates with you. I think the training aspect is improving. I've noticed a lot more training on ESOL literacy happening in England and Scotland. The PDA has been running in a few places, which is really good. I think the problem with some literacy resources is that it's kind of, made for children. And, when we're working with adult learners, the cat sat on the mat is not going to cut it with them. So at COGC, we've kind of got a four-prong approach to our literacy teaching. We've created a synthetic phonics program that we use, and then we also use kind of dedicated resources for improving study skills. A lot of these students in literacy classes haven't had formal education before. And then we have, the touchy-feely literacy, the critical literacy, the everyday functional things, which I think is easier to adapt from beginner level materials. And then we have the language experience approach that we try to use as regularly as possible and really put it into every lesson that we're teaching. So let's have a look at what is the language experience approach. So I'll give you a second to read this from the Bible of teaching basic literacy. I don't think there's been another book written about it. And I think the most important thing in the quote is that it promotes reading and writing through the use of personal experiences and oral language. A lot of the ESOL literacy learners come in and they're very, very strong speakers. They've got such spiky profiles, but they've been able to survive, speaking and communicating. And this is why I think the language experience works so well. Now, I've got a picture of a man with fish, and I don't know if any of you are as old as I am. When I learned about the language experience approach, there was a lovely film called Fish in Somalia, and it was a lovely film that we looked, and the tutor took the student through the whole process of, the beginning, middle, and end of the kind of approach. And I've never been able to find this film again, even when I've been like, I've trawled the internet for this film, but I cannot find it until I came across my Shiro, Judy Kirsch, who did a seminar for the British, I think it was the British Council a few years ago, and she uses this film in her seminar. So I wanted to include this link here, if Pauline can maybe share it with everyone, because it really is a real great overview of the language experience approach, and there's some really good explanations for
Yep,
that.
I've just popped that in the chat, everyone.
It's really, it was, when I saw this, it was a bit like The Godfather 2. It kind of changes your life, you know. It really made the language experience approach really, I could understand what it was about, I could understand the process, and I would really suggest people have a look at that. So I'll give it a go. I won't be as good as Judy, but let's have a look at what the different stages of language, the language experience is. So it always begins with a lot of speaking. So generally you would have a picture and you would ask your learner some questions about the pictures. So for example, here, what do you see in the pictures? You would get them to tell you what they see, and then perhaps ask some questions like, where do you go shopping? How often do you go shopping? What do you buy? So this part of the process takes, you know, it's quite a significant amount of time, because you want to generate the vocabulary that you're going to need to be able to write the text later on. So yeah, you would elicit answers to questions from your learner, and then write down in sentences what the learner says, and perhaps reformulating or correcting the learner's language. It's a lot of questions. Teacher asks a lot of questions, and when you're writing down the text, you're going to maybe be pointing out things like full stops, capital letters, and perhaps asking the learner why there's a full stop or a capital letter. And then hopefully you'll get something like this. This was something that I made with one of my learners. So we wrote down, so the teacher writes down the sentences that the learner gives. So I usually go shopping to Asda. I go on Saturday morning. I buy fish, meat, fruit, and vegetables. I like Asda because cheap. So there's a little kind of question there. There's obviously, this sentence is not grammatically correct, and there's sometimes a little bit of debate on whether to correct or not to correct sentences that the learner gives you. I can't think it depends. It depends on the context. What I tend to do, if it is a student or a group of students that I know will have heard the corrected version, then I'll try to elicit that from them. So perhaps if they said something like, he don't drink, that's, I would maybe try and say, well, he doesn't drink. And if the light bulb goes on that they've heard that before, then I would write that. But generally, just use the language that the learner gives you. So after you've got your text, it's time to analyze the text with your learners. So there's various things, the stages. Probably the teacher would read the text first and the learner listens. They maybe read it together. I think it's always good to get your learner to, the finger reading, I call it. So read the text with the learner, encourage them to point to words as they read. And always asking questions along the way, And then you can look at the text and ask the students to show you different words or different sounds. So perhaps in this text, you might say, can you show me fish? Show me the sound sh. or meet, and maybe ask them, is there another word in the text that's got this E sound? So meet and cheap. So you're looking at the text together. The student has told you it's their text, so they're familiar with all the words. There's nothing new. And then also maybe pointing out full stops and capital letters again, and asking them, why is there a capital letter? Why is there a full stop? So eliciting, you know, all the information that the text includes. And then, you know, let the student read the text on their own. And it's really, really lovely when they get to read their text, because, as I said, there's nothing new for them. It's their language. And I think if a learner, if someone is learning to read, it's a real confidence booster if they're able to read the text. And it's different from when you give them a text that maybe you've found or you've written yourself. That's maybe not always going to boost their confidence, but this definitely does. And then you get to the kind of fun bit of the language experience, and you need to get your scissors out and cut up the text. I usually make a couple of copies of the text. So I've got the original, and I can cut up sometimes into sentences if you know you're working on sentences, or even into just words or even syllables. And I think it's interesting that you include the full stop as an individual element, so they get, you know, familiar with where full stops go. And then, so you've cut up your text, and then the process of manipulating the text, looking at the text, seeing if the learner can reorder the words into sentences, reading as they go until the whole text is reconstructed. Sometimes what I do is take one of the original and I blank out words, and the student needs to remember where certain words go in the text. What I've also done with some learners who are maybe struggling a bit is just give them the text, and they need to find, you know, the same word and put it on top of the original text. And then I move to copying the text on lined paper. And the nice thing here is that they're not just copying anything that doesn't mean anything to them. They're copying something that they have you know, written themselves. And I don't know, it just makes it more real for the student. You know, even when they're copying, they're still reading, they're still practicing the words and sounds that they've come up with. So a lot of us are working with groups, and you know, initially when I used LEA, I would kind of do it one-on-one, but I kind of think it works really well in groups too. I think the important thing is that it's based on a shared experience that the whole class have had. So obviously this was a class trip that we went on a couple of months ago, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be something that they do together. I think it can also be something that they maybe experience together. So something maybe in college or in life, or even kind of watching like a short film together. So it just needs to be shared. So the language and the sentences that you're going to get from them will be common to most of them in the group. So it works in exactly the same way. You know, you maybe use pictures, or, you know, a short film, kind of build up the vocabulary, and then elicit sentences from the group. Now, sometimes the problem is that the stronger students tend to dominate, but I think just with any kind of classroom management, you know, either just assign individuals to, you know, to give you the sentence and ask the other students, do they agree? Is it correct? Which is nice, because they're already involved in correcting and peer correction while you're putting the text together. I think that, you know, the analysing of the text can be interesting with a group, you know, if you can project generally I would write it up on the computer or on the board, and then the kind of analysis of the text can become quite fun with, you know, people running up to circle words, and you know, it's not just like one-to-one that you're just sitting down. And then, you know, moving on to kind of manipulating the text, it's just the same kind of process. You know, you cut it up and you give them the you know, the words to rearrange and reconstruct the text. And I think that also works really well in groups, because you can put them into pairs or small groups, and you can really hear them helping each other out, reconstructing the text. So you can either put, you know, a stronger learner with a weaker one that gives them a bit more support. I definitely think it can work well with groups as well as individuals. So here are some ideas that I've had along the way to generate the discussion. So obviously, yes, pictures. So there's a picture of Glasgow there. We've written a text about life in Glasgow. But I've started more and more kind of using little films that we watch as a class, and then we write the text together. So social media is really a great friend. There's so many like funny films and things on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube that the students are watching themselves. So some of the examples we've used in classes, I don't know if you're familiar with the chicken and egg Pixar film, which is a great little film about a pig that falls in love with a chicken, but he has an egg addiction, so he needs to give that up until she'll have him. So it's funny. We have fun watching it. There's nice music. Students, you know, even though they're adults, but everyone enjoys a nice, funny film. We've used music videos, which was the one that I remember was Happy. We listened to the song and we watched the video, and then we wrote about what we saw in the video and what makes us happy. Mo Salah is always a great person. I've sat through Mo Salah's best goals with a class, so we could write about them. There's also the singing bus driver in Birmingham, which was a great hit with the class. So we watched the film and then we wrote about the bus driver, and I think we wrote about jobs that we had done or they wanted to do. And then just, you know, things that we know, like the snowman and Simon's cat is always a winner. I find that two of the sites that I often go to are Jamie Keddy's lesson stream. Although I don't follow maybe the lesson that he gives, some of the videos are really good for generating the text. And Film English is another great site if you wanted to check that out for some really good videos. But, you know, along the way, you know, when you come back to class and you've got a bunch of students sitting laughing at a video and they show you the video, it's nice for them to give you some videos that you can use. So just, yeah, find out from your students what they like and what they experience in life and what they enjoy, and use that as your stimulus for the text. So I have a little short video that one of the students in my literacy class gave me. And we started off by, well, the only preparation I had to do was think of like a focus question, which was, which donkey do you like the best and why? So I'm going to try and, let me just stop sharing that. Oh, Pauline.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm trying to, I can't see the, do I need to, no. What can you see at the moment on the screen?
Nothing. I don't think you're sharing at the moment. So you'll need to
Mm.
choose share again and then pick the YouTube
I've got it here. Oh my
Got it
goodness, I
there.
can't
And make
believe we
sure
used
you
to do this all the
remember to
time.
click the sound with it too before you
Yeah.
share it with us.
So can you see YouTube?
Yes, that's it. See it now.
So I'm going to ask you to look at the film and which donkey do you like the best? So I think we'll all agree that donkey number 3 was the nicest donkey. And so from this short film, we wrote this little text. We like donkey 3 because he helps. He is a kind donkey. And from what I kind of like after we've kind of written the text and we've done all the kind of stages that I've spoken about is, you know, in your literacy class, it's good to like talk about other things rather than just, you know, the text. So we made a list of ways that we could be kind to others in class. I think ESOL students are the kindest people in the world anyway, but, you know, from, you know, kind of looking at the text, writing the text, we had quite a lot of speaking activity about things that people could do in the class to help their friends, and kind of reminded me about donkeys. I mean, students, my students like two animals. They love chickens and they love donkeys. And if we're ever struggling for a lesson, I go looking for something about them. And I don't know, I'm going to give you another little thing tonight, is that in Farsi, apparently they have an expression to be as happy as a donkey with a Kit Kat, which I think is a very good expression. So we also, in the class, they managed to tell me some idioms and proverbs in their language with, you know, they helped each other out translating. So there's a lot you can do with these lovely little films. So last year, although I've been using LEA for a few years, and I really do use it a lot, sometimes, you know, I have a class from, you know, August to June. Sometimes it gets a little bit flat because they get so used to the process that they kind of know what's happening. So I went to a training on literacy with EFA. They're based in London. Maybe Pauline can share that too. They're a fantastic group and they have some great training programs. And I did, I say, a couple of sessions with Becky, and I kind of came away from the sessions thinking, oh, there's even more that I can do with LEA in my classroom. And it was kind of like using LEA, but kind of for problem solving, thinking about issues, wider social issues in life. And I was lucky enough to have a colleague, Emily. She's now left the college, but I asked her if she could draw me two pictures, a picture of like good neighbours and a picture of bad neighbours. And that kind of changed. It was with a group and we went into two groups. This was something I got from the sessions from EFA. It's like kind of putting learners into different groups and asking them to kind of look at things. I was lucky enough to have Martha, my classroom assistant, and she was able to transcribe a text with them. But the interesting thing was through doing these two texts, especially the one about bad neighbours, a lot of problems and issues that students face kind of came to the, you know, we started to find out about some pretty horrendous situations that students were living in and with neighbours, and it gave me an opportunity to kind of brainstorm possible solutions with the class, especially with the bad neighbours text, you know, like things that you could possibly say to your neighbour if the music was too loud. And also, you know, I think it was good to be able in some way to explain to students, you know, the reasons that maybe some neighbours are drinking or taking drugs or whatever. It was an interesting lesson to kind of open up more kind of speaking activities after, you know, generating the kind of text with them. And it kind of really made me think more about what pictures or films I was using with the students, and I kind of wondered if there was ways that we could kind of address more of their issues and problems, and they could help each other out by coming up with some solutions. So some of the things that we did in class were, you know, problems in the home. That's just one picture, you know, and you know, a student talked about how she had lots of problems with water in her house, and it was just good to be able to find out and get the other students to give her advice and help, and it just didn't make the LEA so flat afterward. You know, afterwards there was more to it. I could expand it to address some of these issues. We talked about good and bad things about the college. So we had one group doing good, one group doing bad. And then we looked at, you know, the problems that they were having in the college, and looked at some solutions to that. And then the picture about what, you know, someone is speaking, you don't understand them. How does that make you feel? What do you do in that situation? So I think the text we generated was, you know, sometimes I phone the school, I don't understand the teacher. And it was just interesting to see, you know, what they could do in those situations, and possible solutions to problems that they had. And we spoke about, yeah, the bills, how much, you know, bills have increased in the last few years. Some kind of, there was one class we did about, you know, an incident of kind of racism on a bus, and what they could do in those situations. And then also waiting lists for college, because some of them had friends waiting. So just to kind of, it made it less flat for me, and it made me, I was able, after this training, I was able to think this could lead to other things in the classroom. So what are the benefits of LEA? Well, obviously it's learner-centered and personalized. So it's not just something that I've found and I've given to them. I think that is the magic of it. And it kind of validates their voice and experience. I remember a colleague once said to me, you know, he was preparing a class and he said, you know, they're literacy learners, they're not learners at life. They're bringing a lot of experiences into the classroom. And I think it's really really important to use their experience in the class, in lessons, and remember that, you know, they might not be able to read and write in English or even speak that much, but they all have something that they can bring. And I'm lucky enough to work with groups, so there's, you know, there's usually people who are stronger speakers who can translate, and I think that's one of the big benefits of it. And also, you know, when you generate the text, it's exactly at the correct level. It's their language. So I find that works in two ways. You know, you might be working with learners who have got a limited oral output, so the text is a certain way, but also the ones that are stronger speakers, you can, you know, use that vocabulary, and you know, it validates the fact that they are strong speakers and they are able to communicate, and that, you know, working on reading and writing with the vocabulary that they that they give you. And I find with LEA using it, regularly, it really builds and boosts their confidence because it's their text and, they can read it. So it's not something that you've just given them. They have the vocabulary, you help them build the sentences, and then they're able to read the text, which, is a great achievement for people who are, haven't maybe read before in any language, never mind English. And also, it's something that I use, maybe not necessarily as a full lesson. Sometimes I will, but I can, you can, with the shorter films that maybe students show you, you can use them at the beginning of class. If you're running, maybe you've got a bit of extra time, and it doesn't need to be a whole lesson. So I think even if it's just 2 sentences, if the students become familiar with the approach, then they know, the direction it's going in, and it can be something that you can just use for a part of the lesson. It doesn't need to be the whole lesson. And very little preparation, really. All you need to do is, source pictures or get students to give you pictures. And social media has some great little films that you can use, and that you don't need to prepare anything before you get to class. All you need is your paper or your PowerPoint and your scissors, and to kind of be aware of the process that you have to use after you've shown them the pictures. So it's great because you don't need to prepare a lot. You've not got loads and loads of photocopies. So I think that's a great benefit. So I think I've done this really quickly, Pauline. I don't know, maybe I've rushed through it. I'm a bit nervous.
Not at all,
But
not at all. It gives plenty time to have questions.
yeah, I mean, I thought I probably, because I'm rushing it a little bit. But yeah, it's maybe a good time to kind of share our experience or any questions that people have about the LEA. I don't know, sometimes it's easier
Absolutely.
to answer questions than kind of just give
Hmm.
information.
You're very welcome to unmute yourself, folks, or put your hand up or use the chat box, whatever you prefer, that makes you most comfortable. Dave, you have your hand
Can I
up.
ask?
Hi,
Yeah.
Dave.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep. Just to say first, thank you so much, Rosie. That was brilliant, I think.
Thank
And
you.
I'm sure everyone's got a lot of ideas bouncing around for the best sort of talks like this are ones where you get ideas that you can then go to class immediately and do something. So thank you so much. I was going to just talk a bit about LEA because I'm a big fan as well, but I've got a question. Well, I've got two things to say. First is I remember the first times I did it, and it is quite daunting at first, but I think after you've done it a few times, it's not so daunting. So just to sort of reassure anyone who hasn't tried it, you mentioned not much prep or no prep. The only thing I would say is I find it a bit easier if I kind of try to predict what the students might come up with, just
Mhm.
because obviously any kind of text at this level, we've got to kind of grade it so it's, simple for students and for their level. So sometimes I find that quite difficult, writing on the board and just trying to put down their ideas, but in a way that's graded well for their level. So sometimes what I try and do is just kind of predict what they're going to say, but use, very simple language, short sentences. And I'm not, obviously you want the students to lead it when you get that text on the board, but you can kind of steer it so that the English is good for their level, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
I was
some
just,
gentle persuasion. Yes.
yeah, it's a
I
bit of
think
help.
sometimes that comes in the initial start stage when you're maybe looking at the vocabulary, like focusing them on certain things that you want them to kind of use in their sentences. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've got two questions. One, I think I've got my own answer for one of them, but not maybe the other one. Because I've seen some interpretations of this where people say write the text almost exactly as the students say it, including mistakes. And I was quite uncomfortable with that. I don't do that personally, but it might be interesting if you want to say something about that. The other thing I was going to say was, I think that there's a kind of, for me, a struggle between doing this one-to-one and doing it as a group, because I think the one-to-one is kind of quite straightforward, and you can, especially with the follow-up tasks, because I think getting the collaborative text, boarding the text and getting it on the board, then the students copy it, the students can read it aloud. But where do you go with it after that is what I struggle with. And one-to-one, you've got plenty of options because you can very quickly write a gap fill or something. Or as you were saying, you can cut the text up with scissors. When you're as a group, they've all copied that down, but where do you go from there? I've experimented with two things. Neither were perfect, I don't think. So one is kind of that's kind of it. And what I think was fine actually. They copied it down, they read it aloud, we read it aloud as a group, they read it aloud in pairs. And I think that was fine. I used to try to frantically prepare a worksheet in the classroom as they were working. And during my break, I'd kind of sacrifice my whole break frantically making a reordering sentences task, or a words, a sentence snake with no gaps and gap fills and all these tasks, which was great, but I didn't get any break. So I kind of resented it and abandoned that. I don't know if there's maybe there's a compromise, maybe there's something in between the two, because it seems like one's perhaps not exploiting it enough and the other one was exploiting it, but I was frazzled.
Yeah. Often you'll find literacy teachers in their breaks cutting up things. I think with the groups, I wouldn't tend to get them copying from the board. I would kind of frantically rush to the photocopier. And then, so like all of the kind of analysis you would do with the groups, maybe individuals coming up and circling words, and then copy the text. And then, yeah, you maybe have like 10 pairs of students and you have to sometimes I get them to cut it up. If they get used to the pro, they know exactly what they have to do. So, and then I would kind of do the copying at the end. I think I liked using it with groups. I think the most difficult part of the group is generating the text, is like not having some people dominate. So that can be a difficult part. As for correction, I think it depends on the learner that you're working with. Like, as I said, if it's something that I think that they would know or be familiar with, I might encourage the correction. But I've got plenty of texts that, there's just something a bit wrong with it, but they understand it. And I think it depends really on the learner. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I know sometimes when you've got a sentence, you go, no, I can't have this. But if they don't know what the correct version is, then I think it's kind of defeating the purpose. It's really about reading, isn't it? It's not about grammar.
I agree. Rosie, I have a question from Katrina now. Hi, Katrina.
Hi, it was just a comment really. I only teach online. So every class, somehow, whatever we're learning about, I will ask them about themselves. So we're always getting their answers about their lives and their hobbies or whatever. But what I would say was as well, quite a good thing to do is, because my literacy groups are too low to go into breakout rooms, if I've got them into a breakout room, I might not get them out again. So what I would do would share the screen, and as they are telling me their sentences, I would type them down. I would type them so in front so they can see them. But then I would use word wall, and either if maybe one learner gave me four or five sentences, I could make that into their word wall, and I would share it with them alone. But what I often do is, as they're speaking, I will type into a Word document all of their sentences, and then it's really, really easy and really quick just to cut and paste that into a word wall, like an unjumble or something,
Mhm.
and it generates it immediately, and then I can share it with the class.
Yeah, and there's also Jamboard that's quite good for that, that you can move.
I just feel I'm like preparation for literacy and literacy one. I just don't think they would cope with Jamboard. They seem to
Right.
really work really well with Wordwall, and I use
Mhm.
that quite a lot. And I've got a paid account, so I think there's about 16 different activities, and they seem to be able to find their way around. What's good about that is they can play it at home when they're not in class.
Absolutely, they've got
So
something
to get
to.
them, and I can also do it as an assignment, so I can tell if they've played it, and I can tell how many they got correct and how many they didn't. So once they find that out, they do start playing them more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, obviously during the pandemic, I was teaching literacy online, and certainly it's challenging. I think in the end, I kind of, did most of the same things, but then I would maybe make a PowerPoint and put like shapes, and yeah, it's not ideal, but it could be done. I don't miss those days at all. No, it's much better being back in the classroom with my
Unfortunately,
scissors. Yeah.
unfortunately, Aberdeenshire's, it's nearly 2,500 square miles, and we've got people from everywhere in
Mhm.
the Shire. So we have WA, we
Got
have
to
to
do it
deliver
on. Of course, yeah,
online.
of course. But it's definitely
Um,
something that can be used online.
mhm.
Um,
Thank you, Katrina. I'm going to come over now to Hannah. Hannah has a question.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi, not so much a question. I was wanted to follow up with I put it in the chat, but what Dave was saying about how do you manipulate the text in groups? Whenever I've done LEAs with groups, and I've only ever done them with groups, I've always done it over a series of classes, so it's been a part of each class. So the first thing we've done is generate the text, and then I take it away and make a paper copy of it for everyone, and start to do the manipulations then, and then another day we'll come back to it and do something else, and so you can build on it like that, so it's not like the whole focus of the class, but it's coming back to it
Yeah.
over like maybe 3 or 4.
Which is great, because sometimes you do something and then they forget the next, it's good to be able to recycle stuff, and
Yeah,
you're not frantically cutting up things in your
yeah,
break.
it was just so you can get a break. You
Yeah.
can
I
postpone
mean,
the
I think
next till the
the
next.
other thing we do is, we make sure that they have their notebooks, and they're, the text that they've written, that's the last thing that they put in their notebook. All the other kind of practice papers they throw away, and they've got, so by the end of the year, they do have a nice notebook with, lots of text that they've come up with.
Fantastic. Does anybody else have any comments or questions for Rosie, or anybody else that's here tonight?
Hello.
Hello, Gosha.
Gosha, hello,
Hey,
Gosha, how are you?
good to see you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I just wanted to say, when Dave was saying about follow-up activities, I think I tried a few times a little bit of dictation, which I think was in one of the activities in the book. Like Rosie said, the only book that gives us something useful about teaching literacies. And it worked quite well. For some learners who would maybe struggle, we paired them and they would dictate each other words. For some, we tried sentences as well, if they were capable of doing that. So one person read, the other person's write, and then they swap. Sometimes I gave them the text. Sometimes I told them to choose something from the text. So maybe I'll give them a couple of minutes to write down 5 words. And it seemed to work quite well. And again, this is this zero prep thing where you don't have to go and frantically copy things and cut things up, because we all do it. But then it kind of gets a bit messy, I think, when you don't have time to breathe because you're running around and maybe one printer's not working or the other one doesn't have paper.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gosha.
I was going to ask Rosie,
yeah.
sorry, because you mentioned 2 websites that you use for the short videos. You said Film English was one of them, and I didn't catch the name of the other one.
It's Jamie Keddy Lesson Stream. It's a subscription, but it's really, I've found that really useful for finding videos.
Thank you.
That, and you know, he's got the lesson plan around it, which is great, but you know, he's just got an eye for a good video. I think I was probably wondering, you know, hopefully, you know, the stuff that I learned with EFA really kind of expanded my view of LEA, and that how it could be something that could lead to other things in the classroom, you know, finding out about issues that they have. And this idea of, you know, maybe not just one picture, but comparing pictures and having, you know, groups talking about different feelings. And so we did good and bad neighbours. We did good and bad things about Glasgow, which was really interesting, you know, because the good text is always very lovely, you know, and that's nice. But it's nice to also get an insight into, you know, things that aren't so great for students, and then maybe trying to help them find ways to make life better for themselves. I found that, you know, sometimes it gets a bit flat, but that kind of gave a different dimension to it. So I definitely would look out for that training if anyone. It was very, very good.
And Rosie, did you always have someone else in the classroom, a volunteer or a teaching assistant to do the other text?
Usually I had Martha. I was lucky, you know, but you could, yeah, I mean, I know I'm lucky to have a classroom assistant, and that really made it easier. And I know I'm lucky there's a photocopy at the end of the corridor. I know some people are working in very different circumstances, but yeah, I think it's a little bit, hopefully there's something somewhere that you can photocopy something, but you know, you could work with groups at different times.
I was just going to say that, yeah, because you could use that idea, can't you? You know, the same lesson or even in two lessons.
Doing other things well. It's like not so flat that you've got them all, and then but putting them into groups and different texts, and then they can read each other's texts. But it was more the kind of speaking activities that came after that, you know, and you know, making lists of things, how to solve problems, and you know, even signposting about, you know, water coming in the flat, what do you do, who do you phone? And you know, most of the time I didn't know the right answer, but the other students in the class know exactly how to navigate some of these problems.
And I think that's great. That's that social element, isn't it? They love helping each other. So it really puts that those who maybe can't quite read the text can help with all those useful answers because they know how to behave in those situations. Yeah. Fun.
Fantastic. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or any comments for Rosie, apart from how fantastic that was? It's like a real step-by-step guide to doing LEA in class, which is fantastic. Because I think, as Dave pointed out before, Rosie, it feels like quite a daunting concept if you've never done it before. But my advice to anyone in the classroom is be brave and try it out and give it a go. Yeah, it is really worth it. I use it a lot as well. So it is really worth it.
Did you learn about it from the fish in Somalia too?
Well, I did the good old PDA in ESOL Literacies years ago, and we did, I think it was maybe touched on, but it wasn't such a huge feature because it was part of the pilot project for the PDA to begin with.
Okay.
So it's quite a long time ago that I did it. And one of my colleagues is here, Sue, as well. She did it with me at the same time. And it's really only since myself and Sue have started running what was the old PDA, but now is just a module for teaching ESOL literacies that we've come across Dave himself and his videos doing it. And yeah, the fish one, the Somalia and fish one, which are great. They're a little outdated though, and we often wish we could update them slightly and get some sort of modern practice in classrooms going on.
Yeah, it's very difficult to find something, but when I was looking for fish in Somalia and I found Judy's, and that is, it's a nice overview of it if you are new to it, kind of. It's
Absolutely.
good to see the teacher doing it in practice, you know.
Absolutely. I've just had a hand up from Anne. Hello, Anne.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Can't put my video on, but I've not so much a question. And I mean, I'm like yourself, I did lots of training in the past with teaching literacy. But I think having these forums are really useful. It doesn't matter how many years you have been maybe involved with LEA. And I think it's good to see other colleagues, and I say colleagues because I put a comment, Dave Butler trained me a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
And I also think it's good for us to actually go back in to these forums. It doesn't matter how much experience you have, because there's always something else to learn. I think it's part of the professional development. If we just keep, I like to come back in and hear other people's ideas, and if I've anything I can, and I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of unaccompanied young people now, and the LEA approach is fantastic because and it's mostly all young boys, so we talk about football, and it's fantastic, you know, and using that idea, because they open up so much when it's something, point of reference or something they're interested in, football or their video games. So I use the LEA approach quite often, and it does. There's a lot of thinking on the spot. There is a lot of thinking on the spot, because obviously you go in without a lot of photocopies, and but it's worthwhile them